welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm a teacher and author, and this is English Nerd. So about a week ago, we all got the sad news that Bernard Hill, who plays Theoden in the Lord of the Rings movies, has passed away. So I thought I would do a video that was kind of dedicated to him and about the Society of Rohan, which he did such a nice job embodying. I've thought about doing this video for years actually, but I just didn't see where it fit in exactly to the channel. But I know that there are some other Lord of the Rings fans out there who would enjoy learning the connections between Lord of the Rings and Anglo-Saxon culture and language. Just for a little bit of background, J.R.R. Tolkien himself was a professor of Anglo-Saxon, which is the same exact thing language-wise as Old English. So it's not a recognizable language to modern English speakers. It looks a lot more Germanic. It's what Beowulf was written in. So that was what Tolkien's specialty was. He was a philologist, he studied languages, and in particular Old English was his jam. You still study Tolkien when you study Beowulf in college. He's considered this master of that poem. Another thing to be aware of as we're talking about Rohan is that Tolkien fought in World War I, and his position was to train horses for battle, because World War I was the last war that I'm aware of, last major war that employed horses in combat. So all of that's going to inform the choices that Tolkien made as he created the culture of Rohan. So here we go. I'm going to talk about language first. Old English, like I said, is a language that does not look like modern English, but it is where our language came from. And it is amazing once you start digging into Old English as a language, how many connections and Easter eggs Tolkien put into Lord of the Rings as a whole, but particularly the culture of Rohan. It is very intentionally meant to mimic an Anglo-Saxon culture, with the one major difference being the addition of horses. And I'm going to talk about why a little bit later. But the name Theoden is actually an Anglo-Saxon word that means king. So when Tolkien says, this character's name is Theoden King, that's like saying king. Let me show you here in Beowulf. I have an edition that has Anglo-Saxon on one side and English on the other side. So here is some, there we go. So that letter there that does not look familiar probably is called a thorn. It's pronounced like a hissed th. So Theoden, even though it's spelled a little bit strangely. So the actual name of the character means king. The word Ao means horse, and so you have Eomer, Eowyn, all these names and characters. Even Theoden has that EO in there, which I think Tolkien kind of intentionally meant to sound like that word for horse. So just like Tolkien does with all of his cultures, he starts with the language first and then kind of builds from there. So he's using a lot of Anglo-Saxon words. Speaking of Eowyn, so the Ao means horse, Wyn, W-Y-N-N, means joy. So Eowyn is horse joy, or the joy of horses, which is interesting. Almost every name goes back to some kind of Anglo-Saxon root in that culture. So if you start digging in, you'll find them. There are a couple more. So speaking of character names, Grima. Grima is also an Anglo-Saxon word, even though it doesn't sound quite as Anglo-Saxon-y maybe. That means ghost, mask, or helmet, but ghost or mask totally fit the character of Grima Wormtongue, who is the conniving advisor to King Theoden that we meet in King of the Golden Hall in Two Towers. And then Meduseld. the Golden Hall itself is based on an Anglo-Saxon set of words, meodoseld, which is almost exactly the same. There's just an extra O sound in there that means mead hall. So a mead hall is a cultural thing I'll talk about here in just a moment, but it was absolutely central to Anglo-Saxon society. And so having the quintessential mead hall as this beautiful meadowcell, the Golden Hall, makes perfect sense with what Tolkien was doing, basically equating these two cultures. So not only the words, but also the way that they're spoken also reflects Anglo-Saxon conventions and things like that. From something simple like juxtaposition, in Anglo-Saxon poetry there's really strong juxtaposition between joy and despair, joy and sorrow. You have them almost one line smash cutting into another line. Like the beginning of Beowulf, when the mead hall of Hrothgar is being raised up, and there was great rejoicing because the fires that would eventually consume it had not yet come. So it's that kind of juxtaposition, and we have that with the men in Rohan going off to war, and then we have Éowyn alone. It's this very, very clear and intense juxtaposition of feelings and, the good, the bad. And then last, a poem that in the book Aragorn says, but in the movie it's Theoden, the one that says, "Where now is the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? Where is the helm and the hauberk and the bright hair flowing?" So it's this poem with all the questions in it. That is actually almost word for word part of an existing Anglo-Saxon poem called The Wanderer, which you can read. It's about a person who has lost his entire community, which was basically a death sentence at the time. You just lived and died by your clan, by your group, by your lord and his warriors, and together you would kind of forge a life. But the wanderer has lost all of that, and so he's wandering and considering the meaning of life and all of this. And so, yeah, it's, in fact, I have part of it here. This is just the first translation I found, so I don't really know if it's any good. I've seen other translations that are a little bit closer to what Tolkien wrote here. But it says, "Where has the horse gone? Where are my kindred? Where is the giver of treasure? Where are the bunches to bear us, joys of the hall to bring us together?" Very, very similar set of questions, and Tolkien would have known exactly what he was doing there. So that kind of leads nicely into the culture, which was very divided. It was very connected. Everybody had certain roles. So you had the lord of the land, and above this group of people you had the lord, and then you had the warriors. The role of a lord was to be generous to his people. It was to lead them in battle, usually against the Danes, which obviously is not quite the same in Lord of the Rings. But we do have Theoden as a generous ruler. He is he's shown being generous to his people, his followers, his subjects on more than one occasion. He's this magnanimous person, and that was the number one key to being a great lord. To be a great warrior in that culture, the number one thing that made you a great warrior, besides just battle skill and that kind of thing, was loyalty unto death. Like, you were absolutely 100% loyal to the end. So there's a lot of emphasis placed on pledging loyalty to your ruler, for example, and we have all of these scenes in Lord of the Rings, the King of the Golden Hall. I was going back through that chapter and just noting thing after thing that was directly related to this culture of the Anglo-Saxons. We see, for example, in Beowulf, when Beowulf comes to help Hrothgar take care of the monster problem in his mead hall, there is a scene where Beowulf arrives with his warriors, his men, because he's the lord of these people, there's a lord above him, but I guess we won't really get into that. So Beowulf is the leader of the people that he's with. He approaches Hrothgar's mead hall, and he has to talk to a few intermediaries beforehand. He has to drop his weapons. He has to announce who he is. There's this kind of procedure as he's entering this mead hall, and it almost exactly mirrors, beat for beat, thing by thing, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli approaching the Golden Hall. They have to announce who they are, they have to announce where they come from, they have to lay down all their weapons, all of that. So far I've just talked about the men in Anglo-Saxon society. This is fairly typical. A lot of the scholarship is just about men, most of the poems are about men. But you do have some poetry and some insight into women as well, because, surprise, we exist. You have poetry from their perspective, and they appear briefly in works like Beowulf. So Hrothgar's wife Wealhtheow, which I know is a mouthful, is someone who keeps the peace, because you have all these hot-blooded warriors who are drinking mead and things can get a lot rowdy. And so women were considered so we have the king who needed to be generous, the warriors who needed to be loyal, and then the women's role generally was to be peace weavers. That was the language that they would use. They would weave peace. So they would serve, they would broker different alliances or peace treaty, that kind of thing. They normally weren't super involved in the society in a very active sense that is very often talked about, but they were there to keep the peace, weave the peace. And so we see Wealhtheow passing around this cup of mead, welcoming the guests, making sure that there's this peaceful entry. And Éowyn has a very similar moment at the end of King of the Golden Hall, that chapter in Two Towers, where she passes around this cup that seems awfully mead-like. So she is a peace weaver. Obviously, she's much more than that. She becomes this warrior over the course of the story, but she is also a weaver of peace when she is there at the mead hall. Let's see. Okay, the horses. Let's talk about the horses for a moment. Anglo-Saxon society did not have many horses. There were horses existed and all of that, of course, but they weren't used in battle. In battle, it was more hand-to-hand. You had swords, etc. Swords were the main weapon, but really no horses. So Tolkien was of the opinion that if the Anglo-Saxons had horses that they brought into battle, that they could have fought off the Norman invasion with William the Conqueror in 1066 with the Battle of Hastings. So Anglo-Saxons and the different groups of them really controlled England, the area that we now know as the United Kingdom. For a long time, they would fight off invasions, but they were in charge until 1066, when people came over from mainland Europe and took over a big section of that land, and suddenly that's where our language comes from. The Old English that originally prevailed became more Frenchified because the Norman French took over, and so our language became shifted more toward French, and it became the modern English that we know today. In any case, Tolkien was devastated by this development in 1066. He really wished that the Anglo-Saxons had been able to fight off the Normans. And as we see in the tapestry of the Bayeux Tapestry, the Normans did have horses as they were attacking, and the Anglo-Saxons just stood no chance when you have a cavalry going against an infantry. So this is basically Tolkien's fan fiction to fix a variety of literary and historical issues in his mind. So here he gives this Anglo-Saxon culture horses and makes it a very central part of what they do. So Tolkien used both his historical knowledge of that Anglo-Saxon society and his personal experience with horses in World War I to marry those up and make this very convincing society of Anglo-Saxons that revolves around horses. And then I'll leave you with the end of Lord of the Rings, or I guess it's not quite at the end, but Battle of Pelennor Fields. We're in the Return of the King, the third part of Lord of the Rings. As we all know if we've watched the movies or read the books, Theoden is killed in that battle by the Nazgul, and he has this really beautiful death scene. This is not only thematically very much like Anglo-Saxon works that were obsessed with the transitory nature of life. Any Anglo-Saxon work that you look at, and I've looked at, well, the majority of the lines that still exist in that language, there is this preoccupation with the brevity of life. Sometimes it's not paired with despair like you might imagine, but there's just this understanding that you come and go. So we see that in the Battle of Pelennor Fields when Theoden is speaking. We also see some echoes. As I was going back, I didn't really see it before, but as I was going back, I noticed that there were some echoes of Beowulf's death at the end of Beowulf. So Theoden, in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, is on his way out. He's speaking to Merry, who's beside him. It's a really beautiful moment. He says, "Where is Eomer? For my eyes darken, and I would see him ere I go. He must be king after me." So before this, he's saying, I'm on my way out. I'm so sorry I won't be able to fulfill all of my promises to you, Merry. And where is Eomer? I need to pass the torch to him directly. What struck me about this was that in Beowulf, as Beowulf is dying, he also dies in a fight. He also dies from by being attacked by an evil creature. But Beowulf, when he is dying, he has somebody kneeling beside him. He has somebody who's loyal to him standing right there. He doesn't have anybody to pass the torch on to. He doesn't have any heirs. The followers that were supposed to be so loyal to him have mostly fled. There's just the man who's beside him at the end. But Theoden gets all of that kind of rectified. He has an heir who is a noble man. He knows that his sacrifice was worth something. He knows that his followers have been loyal to the end. They've followed him through thick and thin into this seemingly hopeless battle against the forces of evil, against the walls of Minas Tirith. I mean, he gets the Anglo-Saxon send-off, but he gets what Beowulf never got. And then Beowulf's sacrifice, we're left with at the end of the poem, Beowulf, that it really was for very little. He did do some heroic things in his life, but at the end, he was not able to protect his people from destruction, basically. And Theoden was. He was able to contribute to that shift against the forces of evil that were coming against his people. So I think that is a lovely way to end this video. So as you can see, lots and lots of connections between Rohan and Anglo-Saxon language and culture. Please put any that I left out. I know that there are still some more down in the comments below, or if you have questions, or if you just want to say a nice send-off to our Theoden King, Bernard Hill, you can put those in the comments below. All right, like this video. If you like it, do not forget to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness, and I'll see you next week.